The Rick and Bubba Show. We're back. Rand Paul visiting with us, the junior U.S. Senator from Kentucky. And, of course, I know with Rand, a lot to talk about. But, Senator, you got to be fired up about the big ball game tonight.
We are UK all the way. I've got a couple of sons there, so we are big UK Wildcat fans.
Well, now, do you have any of those strange little bets going with the senators from the other state?
Well, we had some with Wisconsin, but I haven't been back to Washington since we beat Wisconsin. I think they owe us some bratwurst and
cheese.
Tried to get them to throw beer in, but I don't think we got them to throw any beer in.
Hey, Senator, obviously, here we are, and I think we're to this point, and I think that's where you can be a breath of fresh air here. All right, we all understand, or well, not all of us, unfortunately, but a lot of us understand that we got problems here, and America is on the wrong track, and we can go on and on about how wrong the track is. We can make our case for that. I think we've done that. I'm kind of part of America that says, okay, what are we going to do about it? And what are the solutions? And I want to support the people that have the solutions. So, I know that's kind of a broad question, but like, for instance, let's take on, the Obamacare ruling and what can be done. Implementation keeps being delayed. I think all of us should find it strange that the people who tell us how great it is will not run on it for re-election. If it's so great, I'd be bringing it up in my re-election speech, but they don't.
What's even more important than Obamacare is the way they're going about it. Our founding fathers set up a government with checks and balances. You got the Senate checking the House and vice versa. You got the legislative branch checking the president. But when he thinks he can just amend and or write legislation without any checks and balances, that's the real problem. It's even bigger than just Obamacare itself, the fact that the president thinks he can legislate without any authority. And, Montesquieu wrote about this. He said, when the executive becomes the legislative branch, you develop a form of tyranny. And so it is very dangerous what's going on in the country, and he needs to be stopped. One way you stop him is in the elections. We weren't successful there. Another way is in the courts. We've been suing him over acting unconstitutionally, and we have at least there's probably a half a dozen court cases. In fact, I'm suing him over the NSA right now.
Well, Senator, you brought up a good point, and maybe that is the answer. It's going to take time to work out, but he can't just take a pen and change legislation, can he? I mean, my school kids have been asking me about it and said we think that's what the legislative branch does. I mean, how is he getting away with that?
Yeah, all you got to do is watch Schoolhouse Rock, and you know how a bill's supposed to be made. I mean, for goodness sakes. No, the thing is that it's hard to get standing in court to sue him over this. There are a few cases proceeding forward. It takes a while, though. When he appointed people, when he said the Senate was in recess and he went ahead and made appointments, even though we said we weren't in recess, that's already gone to the Supreme Court now. At the appellate court, we won, and we think we're going to win at the Supreme Court, and it's going to be a big rebuke to him to say there are laws in our country and you must follow them. We need to have the same thing in Obamacare. And like I say, it's bigger than just Obamacare. It is about the separation of powers. It is about the checks and balances. And he has to be stopped. And but we also have to win elections as well. So it's got to be a two-pronged strategy.
Well, you brought up Obamacare, and it's been a hot topic on the show. And you may not can comment on this, and if you can't, we understand. But we were just so surprised at the way that Chief Justice John Roberts voted. It just seems so out of the blue for him lined up with the far left part of the court. We don't see that a lot, and to see him on that in such a big case, Kennedy's usually who we think of as the swing vote. Did you find that vote odd?
Yeah, and I was very disappointed, and it is very legalistic, but basically the bill says hundreds of times that we're going to enforce a penalty, and then Justice Roberts rules that it's a tax. But basically it's worse than that. He says, well, taxes can be for any reason. There is no restriction on taxes. So basically you can tax a person to eat their broccoli. You can tax a person to, wear the correct kind of shirt. And that's really a problem if you can tax behavior, particularly behavior like buying something from a private individual or a private insurance company, that you can tax that. So no, I was really disappointed. And basically he had to overrule the government's own arguments because the government was arguing that it wasn't a tax. he argued that it was a tax, but then he concluded, well, you can do whatever the hell you want as long as you call it a tax.
Well, I mean,
That's dangerous,
yeah,
man.
isn't that a very dangerous? Because
Golly.
we could now say that anything could be authorized by the government as long as there was a tax for not doing it the way the government wanted you to do it.
Yeah, and see, some of the conservatives tried to see a silver lining here. They said, well, they did rule that the Interstate Commerce Clause would not allow them to do that. And that's true. They closed one door, which has been used for about 70 years to justify big government. But in closing that door, they opened, I think, an even bigger door, saying that basically you can tax any kind of behavior to tell people or to try to coerce people into any kind of behavior. So it is a problem. And, that's a tricky thing about a court. Even when you get a Republican, sometimes the nomination doesn't work out so well. So it is an incredibly important tool, as far as who gets to appoint and who ends up being on the Supreme Court.
And we're talking to Senator Rand Paul. Senator, back to this point, you just touched on it. We just heard one of the Supreme Court justices with the Hobby Lobby case, and also there's many other business people
tied to that
who say, I have a faith that forbids me to provide in healthcare packages things that I find morally reprehensible. And one of the justices said to the lawyer, well, why didn't Hobby Lobby just pay the fine then? I mean, that's the mentality that we're running into.
Well, and here's the amazing thing about this fine. It's like $26 million if they don't provide any insurance. It's a couple $100 million if they provide insurance that President Obama doesn't like. So here's the thing. They're providing 45 different types of birth control. They object to 4 different types of birth control that they consider to be abortion. So because of that, they're going to fine them hundreds of millions of dollars because they object to 4 out of 49 different birth control methods. It's really obscene. And, I like the way their lawyer has put it. Their lawyer has said, in America, to stay in business, you shouldn't have to give up on your faith. And I think it's exactly right. They shouldn't be mutually exclusive.
Now, you also mentioned the Republican Party, and I've talked about this. We've talked about it on the show. I kind of have this strange concept. I don't like using strategy that doesn't work, and I know that makes me weird, but I really like to do
time and time again. Right?
I want to do things that have worked, and I want to not do things that have never worked. Can we get the Republican Party to understand that if we keep throwing up these moderate candidates, we are not going to win?
What I keep saying is there's 2 choices. You can do that. You can say, we're going to dilute our message and we're going to become Democrat light, but then the base will sit on their hands, sit at home and say, if there's no difference, I'm not going out to vote. Or the alternative is we be as bold as we can be. We believe in what we believe in. We believe in what Reagan said, lower taxes, less government. We believe in it strongly and forthrightly. But we also go beyond that to try to find people who haven't been listening to our message. And that's what I've been trying to do. I'm not giving up on anything as far as I believe, as far as taxes, balanced budgets, and less regulation. But I have started to go to audiences that haven't been listening to us, to young people on the Fourth Amendment and privacy, to minority audiences to talk about individual rights and liberties, and why if you're part of any kind of minority, whether it's the color of your skin or the shade of your ideology, whether you're a homeschooler or part of a racial group that has been prejudiced against in the past, you need to protect individual rights, because when the majority comes along and says, no, your rights are not from your creator, your rights are not sacred, then that's a real danger.
Yeah.
Senator, too, a lot of people wanted me to ask you about this massive buildup of bullets by the Homeland Security and why we can't find 22 bullets at your local store now. What is going on with that? Is that justified, or is that being blown out of proportion?
Well, you remember when the president ran, he said he was worried about all these people with their religion and their guns and their religion. And my sort of joking response is, he's concerned about your guns, your religion, and your ammunition. So
yeah.
I think, I'm not sure. There have been various reports. Some of them have tried to downplay this and say some of those are procurements or orders, not actual taken. But it is alarming, I think, how many federal agents are carrying guns. I'm for the FBI, the CIA, and the Army, but I'm not necessarily for the Department of Agriculture having a SWAT team.
That seems a little much. I mean, they don't need attack helicopters to look at my corn, do they?
Well, here's the deal. The Department of Agriculture has a SWAT team, and they invaded an organic milk store selling raw milk in L.A. and shut them down. The Fish and Wildlife used their SWAT team to invade Gibson Guitar because they claimed there was some wood coming without the proper permit from somewhere in India. And so it is kind of crazy what the EPA has guns. I mean, so really the first thing we ought to do is protect the Second Amendment for private individuals and really limit it for people from the government.
Yeah, you opened the EPA door. I mean,
oh my goodness.
I mean, there are people, and I think rightfully so, say if you want to see how the socialist people in this administration, how they want to implement their socialist vision for this country, one of their strongest weapons to accomplish that is the EPA.
Yeah, the EPA is completely out of control, and I'll give you one quick example of what the EPA did in the last half a dozen years. There was a guy in southern Mississippi down towards the coast. He had land that even in Katrina was never flooded, and so it never had water on it, and he started building on it. They came to him and said that he was violating the Wetlands Act, and he said, well, there's no water. Well, they said there's 300 different plants that we can say signify a wetland, including leaves that have black on the bottom of the leaves.
Oh, my goodness.
So he was given 10 years in prison. He's 70 years old, and he's in jail for 10 years. His name is Ken Lucas. His daughter's Robbie Wrigley. She was given 8 years in prison for selling the lot. They're all convicted under conspiracy to violate the Wetlands Act. And here's the problem. The Clean Water Act was originally well-intentioned. It said you can't dump pollutants in a navigable stream.
That makes sense.
That.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But here's what they've done. They've transformed it into dirt is a pollutant and your backyard is a stream. And so they've just made something that was well-intentioned crazy. But we've got people in jail for 10 years for putting clean dirt on their own land.
Yeah, and Senator, I was going to tell you too. You know, if you farm and you're an outdoorsman and you like being outside and you love the land, you know, cow ponds and fishing ponds are a common sight. But you know, and I know many examples of what you mentioned the term navigatable waterway, where the EPA can come in and claim authority over any stream or creek on your property.
Yep.
Now, to me, it is not navigatable if I can step over it. You know, I think, shouldn't they have a litmus test where they have to get in a canoe and float down it to prove it's navigatable?
Well, here's the thing, because I asked some people about this as I started looking into all this ridiculous stuff of people being put in jail for, you know, basically where there's no water. And one of the Idaho senators said, we have an exact test. You got to float, like a 4-inch log has to be able to float more than 100 yards for it to be a navigable stream.
Well, and I wish they'd use that in our state.
Yeah, it sounds like a real test, because that's the problem. We are now talking about places where there is no water. They're calling things wetlands that even when it rains, you can't even find water that's sitting there. You can actually, they take soil samples, and if they measure water in the soil, they're calling it wetlands. And I grew up in Texas. We called that a mosquito haven. And
all right, we got to take a break. Senator, thanks for being with us, and good luck to UK tonight.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Bubba.